You know, we live in a world that never stops moving. It's like we're all caught in this whirlwind of noise and chaos, constantly surrounded by distractions, demands, and deadlines. Every time we turn around, there's something else pulling at our attention, stealing our focus, our peace, and most importantly, our ability to hear that still, small voice that God is speaking into our hearts. It's easy to forget, isn't it? We get so caught up in the clamor of the world that we forget to pause. We forget to breathe. We forget to listen. But what if the key to everything, your peace, your direction, your purpose, lies in the quiet? What if the most important conversations of your life happen not in the hustle and bustle, but in the silence? In the moments when you simply turn off the world and allow yourself to hear God more clearly. Now, I know this is hard. I know that in the midst of the busyness, it feels like there's just no time. But here's the truth. The noise will always be there. The distractions will never leave. But God is waiting for us to create space to be still and to hear him. And when we do that, when we quiet our hearts and still our minds, something incredible happens. God speaks to us. He leads us. He gives us strength. He fills us with his peace. Friends, this is not just a suggestion. It's a command from God. Be still, he says, and know that I am God. In the silence, he will do more than speak. He will transform your heart, your life, and your future. So let's do something radical today. Let's make a decision together to turn off the world just for a moment, to tune out the distractions and tune into the voice of God. It's time to hear him more clearly than ever before. Are you ready? Let's begin. Silence is sacred. In a world filled with constant noise, it's easy to forget the importance of quiet moments. We are always bombarded with sounds, messages, and distractions. Our phones beep with notifications, the TV hums in the background, and the world around us never seems to stop. The more we try to keep up, the more overwhelming it becomes. And yet, in the midst of this cacophony, God is calling us to a place of silence, a place where we can hear his voice more clearly. God's voice is not found in the noise of our daily lives. The rushing, the deadlines, the pressures, we think that's where we need to be. That's where we need to focus, but the truth is, God often speaks in the quiet. The moments when everything else fades away, when the distractions lose their grip on us, that's when we can hear him the most. His voice is gentle, a still small whisper that can easily be drowned out by the loudness of life. And yet, it is in that quiet whisper that we find peace, guidance, and comfort. In the Bible, we see this principle over and over again. When God spoke to Elijah, he didn't speak through the great wind, the earthquake, or the fire. Instead, he spoke through a gentle whisper. It's a powerful reminder that the God who created the universe, the one who holds all things in his hands, doesn't shout to get our attention. He doesn't demand we listen. He simply invites us into the stillness where we can hear him. It's in the moments of quiet reflection, when we turn away from the noise and distractions, that we make room for God to speak to our hearts. This is a truth that is often hard to accept in our fast-paced world. We are taught to hustle, to always be doing something, to always be moving forward. The idea of stopping, of sitting in stillness can feel uncomfortable. We fear missing out, falling behind, or being left out of the race. But the reality is, the more we allow ourselves to be consumed by the noise, the less we hear the voice of God, the less we are able to discern his will for our lives, the less we can understand his heart for us. The more we fill our days with busyness, the more we risk losing the most important conversation we could ever, the conversation with our Creator. When we make time for silence, we are not just choosing to be still, we are choosing to prioritize our relationship with God. We are choosing to acknowledge that above all the noise, he is the one who deserves our attention. The noise may be relentless, but God's voice is patient. He will wait for us to quiet our hearts, to still our minds, to open our ears and listen. In those moments, we can hear his love, his wisdom, and his guidance in ways that we never could when we are surrounded by distractions. In silence, we are given the gift of reflection. We are able to look inward, to examine our hearts, and to listen for the ways in which God is speaking to us. It's in the quiet that we begin to understand what he wants for our lives, what he's calling us to, and how we can walk in his purpose. The silence allows us to hear his voice with greater clarity, to discern his will with greater accuracy, and to experience his presence in a deeper way. The noise of the world will always be there, pulling at us, demanding our attention. But the sacred silence is where we encounter God, where we hear his voice, and where we experience the peace that only he can give. It's not a luxury, it's a necessity. The more we make room for silence, the more we make room for God to work in our hearts, to transform our lives, and to guide us on the path he has set before us. As we learn to embrace the sacredness of silence, we begin to see that it's not about doing less. It's about doing more of what matters. It's about giving God the space he deserves to speak into our lives, to shape our hearts, and to lead us with his love. The world may be loud, but God is waiting for us to make space for him. It's in the silence that we hear him most clearly, and it is in the silence that we find the peace we so desperately need. Distractions drown God's voice. It's an unfortunate reality that we often let the noise of life drown out the most important voice we could ever hear, the voice of God. From the moment we wake up until the moment we fall asleep, we are surrounded by distractions. The pressure of our responsibilities, the constant stream of information, the demands of our relationships, and the pull of our own desires can make it feel impossible to hear anything else. Yet in the midst of it all, God is still speaking to us, offering guidance, comfort, and love. The question is, are we listening? Distractions don't just come in the form of physical noise, they also invade our thoughts and emotions. Our minds are constantly racing, always thinking about what's next, what's urgent, what's important. Our hearts are often torn between competing desires, our dreams, our fears, our needs, and our obligations. In this whirlwind of thoughts, it becomes harder and harder to hear the still small voice of God. We become so overwhelmed by the noise that we miss the moment when God is trying to speak into our lives. The Bible speaks of the importance of focusing on God and turning away from the distractions of the world. In Psalm 46:10, God commands us to be still and know that I am God. This isn't just an invitation, it's a command, a call to stop what we are doing, to quiet the noise, and to turn our hearts and minds toward him. The more we allow ourselves to be consumed by distractions, the more we miss out on what God is trying to show us. We may be moving fast, we may be accomplishing things, but if we are not tuning into God's voice, we risk losing the very purpose and direction he has for our lives. Distractions don't just keep us from hearing God, they also cause us to miss out on his best for us. When we are constantly caught up in the rush of life, we make decisions out of fear, pressure, or impatience. We settle for the temporary satisfaction of a quick fix or an immediate solution, rather than waiting for God's timing and trusting in his wisdom. In the midst of the noise, we often make choices that don't align with God's will, and we find ourselves off course, wondering why things don't feel right. The distractions cloud our judgment, blur our vision, and lead us away from the path God has for us. But the good news is this: we can make a choice. We can choose to silence the distractions, to step away from the noise, and to intentionally seek God. The key is to be aware of, without stillness, we risk burning out, we risk losing our way, and we risk missing out on the very thing that will sustain us, God's presence. Stillness also allows us to hear from God in ways we can't in the chaos. In the quiet, God speaks to us clearly. He reveals his plans for our lives, gives us wisdom for the decisions ahead, and strengthens our faith. But this kind of clarity only comes when we stop long enough to listen. It's not about doing more. It's about being more present with God. When we are still, we open our hearts and minds to the voice of God, and we find the guidance we need to move forward. We don't have to strive for answers. We just have to be still and allow God to speak into our lives. When we embrace stillness, we embrace the strength that comes from knowing we don't have to do it all ourselves. In stillness, we lean into God's power, his wisdom, and his grace. We acknowledge that in our weakness, he is strong. Stillness doesn't mean passivity or inactivity. It means trusting God enough to stop trying to control everything and allowing him to lead us. It's in that surrender that we find true strength. Moreover, stillness helps us to center our hearts and focus on what really matters. The distractions of life can pull us in so many different directions, but stillness gives us the opportunity to recalibrate. It allows us to focus on God, on his love, and on his purpose for our lives. When we are still, we find the peace and clarity we need to make decisions, to understand God's will, and to walk with confidence in the path he has set before us. In a world that celebrates doing, being still can be one of the most powerful things you can do. It's in the stillness that we find the strength to face the world. It's in the stillness that we are renewed and refreshed. It's in the stillness that we are reminded that we are not alone, that God is with us, and that he will always give us the strength we need to carry on. Stillness is not a sign of weakness. It is a choice to rely on God's strength rather than our own. It is in that space of quiet surrender that we are empowered to live the life God has called us to live. God's voice requires intentionality. In our busy, fast-paced lives, it's easy to assume that hearing from God should come naturally, that his voice will simply break through the noise and demand our attention. But the truth is, God doesn't usually shout to be heard. Instead, he calls us to be intentional about listening. It requires us to slow down, to make time, and to actively seek his presence in the midst of everything else that's going on. God's voice is always available to us, but it's up to us to listen with purpose, to carve out the space where we can truly hear him. Intentionality in our relationship with God means choosing to make him a priority. It means setting aside the distractions and the demands of daily life in order to focus on his voice. Too often, we allow the noise of the world to drown out the quiet whisper of God. We may say we want to hear from him, but we don't make the time or the effort to do so. We get so caught up in our own plans, our own desires, and our own agendas that we forget to stop and listen. But hearing from God requires more than just wanting to hear from him. It requires a decision to actively seek his presence. When we are intentional about spending time with God, we create the space for him to speak into our lives. This doesn't mean that we have to be in a perfect place, that we have to have everything figured out, or that we need to be in a specific location. What matters is our heart posture. Are we willing to stop, to listen, and to be receptive to what God wants to say? It's easy to get distracted by our own thoughts and desires, but God wants us to focus on him, to tune out the distractions, and to open our hearts to his voice. Its intentionality also means taking the time to understand God's voice. God's voice isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes he speaks through a gentle prompt, a quiet thought, or a subtle nudge. It requires us to be sensitive to the ways in which he speaks to us. For some, it's through the scriptures. For others, it may be through prayer, through the counsel of wise friends, or even through the circumstances of life. Whatever the method, we must be intentional about recognizing and responding to God's voice when he speaks. God's voice is also often accompanied by peace. When he speaks, there's a sense of clarity, calm, and reassurance, even in the midst of uncertainty. This peace isn't always the absence of difficulty, but it's a deep assurance that God is present, that he's in control, and that he is guiding us. When we listen to God intentionally, we can discern his peace amidst the confusion, and that peace becomes a powerful confirmation that we are hearing from him. Being intentional about listening to God also means committing to consistent time with him. Just as we need time to build relationships with the people we love, we need time to build our relationship with God. This intentional time with him strengthens our ability to hear his voice clearly. It helps us to understand his heart and his desires for us. The more time we spend in his presence, the more familiar we become with his voice, and the easier it becomes to recognize when he is speaking. God doesn't force himself into our lives. He invites us to listen, to seek him, and to be intentional about making space for him. He longs to speak to us, to guide us, and to comfort us, but we must choose to listen. Hearing from God doesn't happen by accident. It requires a conscious decision to turn away from the distractions, to quiet our hearts, and to open ourselves to his voice. When we are intentional about seeking God's voice, we are investing in the most important relationship we can have. God doesn't want to be a distant figure in our lives. He wants to be close to us, to walk with us, and to speak to us. But we have to be willing to make him a priority. Intentionality is the key to hearing God more clearly and to walking in the fullness of his purpose for our lives. It's not enough to simply hope for God to speak. We must take the time and the effort to listen. Only then can we hear his voice, receive his guidance, and live according to his will. The world will always be loud, no matter how much we try to escape it, the noise of life will continue to surround us. The constant pull of responsibilities, the demands of work, the expectations of others, and the endless stream of information, these things never stop. The world is filled with distractions, and the louder it gets, the harder it becomes to hear the quiet, reassuring voice of God. But here's the reality we must face. The noise will always be there. It's up to us to choose to step away from it and make room for God to speak. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that the next thing, the next moment, the next achievement will bring us peace. We look for fulfillment in the noise, in the busyness, believing that if we just keep moving, if we just keep doing, things will fall into place. But the truth is, the world will never give us the peace we're truly longing for. It will only give us more noise, more pressure, and more distractions. The world is designed to keep us busy, to keep us moving, but that doesn't mean we have to live at its pace. God, on the other hand, invites us into something different. He calls us to pause, to step back from the frenzy, and to seek Him in the quiet. It's in the stillness, in the moments when we step away from the noise, that we can truly hear God's voice. The world will always be loud, but God's voice is often a whisper, gentle and patient, waiting for us to make space for it. It's up to us to choose to listen, to intentionally carve out moments of quiet where we can hear God more clearly. The world will always demand our attention, but God will never force Himself into our lives. He doesn't scream over the noise. He waits for us to be still enough to hear Him. And in that stillness, in that quiet place, we find the peace and clarity we need to navigate the chaos of the world. The noise may be overwhelming at times, but when we intentionally create space for God, we begin to hear His voice above it all. What's important to understand is that we have a choice. We don't have to be consumed by the noise. We don't have to live in the constant rush of life. The noise may be relentless, but God offers us a different way, a way of peace, a way of quiet. When we take time to step away from the noise, we find that it's not about escaping the world. It's about focusing on what matters most. It's about listening to the voice of God, whose peace surpasses the noise of the world. When we choose to listen to God's voice instead of the noise, we begin to align ourselves with His will, His plans, and His purpose for our lives. The world may keep trying to pull us in 1,000 different directions, but when we focus on God, we find direction, peace, and clarity. The more we practice turning down the volume of the world and tuning into God's voice, the more we learn to hear Him clearly. The world will always be loud, but we don't have to let it control us. We can make a choice to step out of the noise and into the peace of God. We can choose to prioritize His voice over the constant demands of the world. And when we do, we will find that God's voice is the one that guides us, the one that leads us through the noise and into the life He has prepared for us. The world will always be loud, but we have the power to listen to the voice that matters most. Transformation happens in the quiet. In a world that constantly pushes us toward action, achievement, and external validation, it's easy to overlook the power of silence. We are often conditioned to believe that progress is only made through noise, through busyness, through the hustle of life. But in the stillness where everything slows down and the world fades away, that's where God does His deepest work in us. It's in these quiet moments that we are transformed, refined, and reshaped into the people He has called us to be. Transformation doesn't always happen in the public eye or in the midst of our most significant achievements. It happens in the secret places, in the quiet moments when we choose to pause and allow God to speak to us. It's in those spaces of stillness that we are able to reflect, to listen, and to open ourselves up to God's work in our hearts. In the quiet, God can convict us, heal us, and shape our character in ways that are impossible when we are distracted or overwhelmed by the noise of life. Think about how a seed grows. It doesn't happen through noise or movement. It's a slow process that takes place deep beneath the surface in the stillness of the soil. Similarly, the work that God does in our lives often happens in those quiet, unseen moments. We may not always feel the immediate impact, but God is planting seeds of growth, nurturing our hearts and preparing us for the future He has planned. The transformation is not always instant, but it is always happening in the quiet. In those moments of silence, we are also able to gain clarity and perspective. When life is constantly rushing at us, we can easily become disoriented, confused, or overwhelmed. But when we step into the quiet and turn our attention to God, He gives us the perspective we need to see things as they truly are. He brings clarity to our confusion, peace to our anxiety, and understanding to our struggles. Transformation comes when we allow God to adjust our perspective, when we let Him help us see our lives and our challenges through His eyes. It is also in the quiet that we find healing. Many of us carry wounds, regrets, and burdens that we haven't fully addressed. The noise of life can mask the pain, but the silence allows us to confront it. In the stillness, God can bring healing to our brokenness, restore the parts of us that have been damaged, and make us whole again. Transformation happens when we allow God to heal those places in our hearts that we've kept hidden away. Moreover, transformation in the quiet often involves surrender. It's when we stop trying to control everything, stop striving to prove ourselves, and stop running from our challenges that we allow God to truly transform us. In the silence, we come face to face with our need for Him. We realize that we cannot change ourselves, that we cannot fix our brokenness or navigate life's challenges on our own. In the stillness, we surrender our plans, our fears, and our control to God, and it is in that surrender that transformation occurs. This process of transformation is gradual, and it often doesn't look like what we expect. We may not always see immediate results or dramatic changes, but when we spend time in the quiet, God is working in us. He is cultivating patience, strengthening our faith, and shaping our hearts to be more like His. The quiet moments are not wasted. They are essential to the process of becoming the people God has created us to be. Transformation happens in the quiet because it is in those moments that we make space for God to move. When we stop filling our time with noise and distractions, we open ourselves up to His presence. In that presence, we are changed. It may not be a loud or dramatic change, but it is a profound one. The quiet moments of our lives are not merely pauses in the chaos. They are opportunities for God to do His deepest and most lasting work in us. If we want to see real transformation, we must learn to embrace the quiet. We must create space for God to speak, for Him to heal, for Him to shape and mold us. The world may tell us that we need to be constantly moving, constantly achieving, but God tells us that we need to be still and know that He is God. And it is in the quiet that we are transformed, and it is in the quiet that we are made into the people He has destined us to become.